I want to quote something from Nigel Kilpatrick, who's recently started the Compassion Exchange, all about talking through this narrative of toxic workplaces and changing the culture through connecting people in workplaces, managers and supervisors, business owners with people who are service providers like myself with training, mentoring, and coaching. Now, Nigel has posted this today, so I'm sorry I'm putting this one out public. It's a very brief one, but he's put, remember that safety is felt long before it's declared. Now, he continues to talk about that in this post, but that's what I wanted to bring an example for today in response to that, because it reminded me of a story I've told on social media before, but I could not find the post anywhere today. So let me share this with you to support that concept. Now, when we're talking about safety being felt, that also means danger is felt, because the two are mirrors of each other. If it's safe, then it's not dangerous. If it's dangerous, it's not safe. And there is this kind of balance between the two that is really crucial for getting right. Now, sometimes we don't want people to feel overly safe because they haven't got that to do their work. They need to know they've got to achieve their tasks and their goals and their deadlines to be able to earn their money at the end of the month if you're employing them. But at the same time, we don't want a job, employees to feel so constantly under pressure that they're afraid of turning up to work in case they lose their job, or afraid of doing this task in case they get reprimanded or fired. So there's this element of safety and danger that is quite a fine balance in most workplaces. Now, when it comes to the sensing danger and safety, this is the part that I wanted to share a little story on to show how subtle it can be to give staff that sense of danger or that sense of safety. And it's actually an example from when my own son was about 3 years old. Now, you might think, but he wouldn't have been in the workplace. But you know what? The nursery staff were at work. And the same through all of education, all of primary school, college, university, the staff are at work, even though for my son, he was in education. And here's the story. I was taking him to nursery, and every morning, the nursery head teacher would greet the children at the door. Most days it would be her anyway. And she would greet them with, good morning, good morning, good morning. And she would say their name. So she would greet each child with their name. And they were expected to say, good morning, Mrs. W. I'll call her Mrs. W for now. And they were expected to say, good morning, Mrs. W. And then they were allowed into nursery for the day. Now, I get that this is teaching good manners. And it's setting up a cheerful disposition that they come in feeling welcomed. However, there was a slight difference when it came to my son. All the other children were like, good morning, Mrs. W. And in they went. My son, head down, ignored her, went in. And this went on day after day after day, that he would ignore her. Now, if the nursery assistant was there and said good morning, he'd be, oh, good morning, and go in. And we noticed this pattern that he was ignoring the head teacher of the nursery. And I was then also by now getting reports that it was the same in sessions. If anybody else asked him to do something, yes, of course. But he was ignoring the head teacher, like point blank, ignoring her, turning his back on her, and completely blanking her out. Total block, stonewalled. At 3 years old, nobody could understand why. Now, you can imagine from her perspective, she's trying to do everything to get him to talk to her, to engage with her, and nothing was working. But she was more frustrated by the fact that he would respond to other adults and other staff. Why not her? But somehow the blame was still being put on me as a mum. Your son's not doing this, your son's not being polite, blah, 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 blah. I was getting to a point, even I was afraid to turn up to the nursery because I didn't know what I was going to be blamed for because of his actions or reactions. And so this went on for 3 whole months, right? This escalated for 3 months until finally one day, my intuition kicked in. I thought, maybe he doesn't like her tone of voice. But at 3 years old, he did not know emotionally how to convey that. So there was something about this demanding, condoning kind of good morning tone rather than, oh, good morning. And it was a subtle difference. There was something about it that I figured he didn't like, and it set him up for the day every day in the wrong mentality. Now, at this time, I didn't know for another 5 years that my son was on the autistic spectrum, but I kind of knew something was different. And the same, there are so many adults in work who have no idea they are on the autistic spectrum, got ADHD, got a number of other things that go on. There's over 450 diagnosable mental health disorders, and any number of them could be present in any workplace. All I could gather was that for some reason, he had a very strong sense of justice, even at 3 years old, still barely verbal. I mean, he could speak, but his sentences weren't cohesive. He was vocal, but non-communicative. We couldn't ask him what is the problem because he couldn't tell us. But here's the thing. The emotional cycle is present in all of us from before we are even born. It is in every cell in our body, but I'm not going to go too deep into that today. But the emotional cycle was there. He knew how he felt, but he had no way of telling us. The only way he could tell us that he didn't like her was to not talk to her. That made sense to him. I don't like her, not responding. So I set this meeting up with the nursery head teacher, and I sat down and said, I really think the reason he's not talking to you is because I think he doesn't like the tone of voice that you greet him in. Actually, I really don't believe that's ridiculous. I've never heard anything so ridiculous. And bearing in mind, she'd been doing this job for well over 20 years, and a child had never done this to her before. This was a first, right? This really was a first. My son's quite unique. Even at 3 years old, autistic spectrum, non-communicative. And so there was a lot of indignation about this. And then about 10 minutes later, she conceded to saying, well, I suppose I could try a different tone of voice, but I don't see it's going to make any difference. So I took him into nursery again the next morning, and the head teacher greeted him, good morning, Matthew. That completely different tone of voice, right? It was subtle, but it was a different tone of voice. And he looked up and went, oh, good morning, Mrs. W, and went into nursery like nothing was wrong. Her face was an absolute picture. Now, mine was too, because even I hadn't expected results that quickly. But all it was that tone of voice being commanding and condescending made him feel emotionally unsafe. And he had that sense from very young. Now, as he progressed into primary school, from the ages of 5 to the ages of 9, I noticed over and over that when he met new friends or new people came into the school, or he had new teachers or visitors, you met someone new today, what were they like? And my son's description of people was always one of 2 words. Either they were safe or they were unsafe. And that was how he described all of his encounters with new people, safe or unsafe. Most children would say they like someone or they disliked them. But my son chose the word safe or unsafe because emotionally, that's how he felt. Now, when you can take that lesson from a 3-year-old and apply that to the emotions that every single member of staff has every single day, greeting managers, supervisors, bosses, clients, and colleagues, can you imagine the impact that has across the whole workplace? I hope you enjoyed my story, and thank you, Nigel, for inspiring that today for me to share that. Have a great evening, everybody.